So we're now going to move to the formal part of the program. The Minister will be speaking in just a couple of moments. I think everyone knows that the Infrastructure Ontario Market Update is an important and very welcome event for everyone involved in the infrastructure sector. And announcing a project pipeline, as you all know better than anybody, helps bring real stability to the marketplace. And companies that are active in this space can actively identify projects they want to pursue and quickly start teaming up. And that is a remarkable process to watch. Ontario, as you know, is also the largest infrastructure market in Canada, and I think, quite frankly, well beyond Canada, and the one with the most P3s in operation and under construction. What it does and how it does it is closely watched by markets around the world. And Ontario, through the hard work of IO, has a solid track record, as you know, for delivering large public infrastructure projects on time and on budget. And in fact, every year when that independent assessment is done, the numbers are pretty impressive in terms of their ability to meet those two critical criteria. And for transit projects in particular, which will be part of the focus today, one thing I'd like to mention is that IO is a constant companion with Metrolinx, and quite frankly, they make a formidable team. And that's why I'm so pleased today to have both Ehren and Phil here with us today. And it's also a market that matters to a great number of local and international companies. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few folks today starting to team up once they get a bit of a look at what that pipeline is going to include. It's also important to note how important the projects discussed today will be for communities where they're located, because these are projects that are going to have tremendous economic and social impact. And as we all know, irrespective of how we describe infrastructure investment, it's really all about the quality of life of Canadians and obviously here Ontarians. So it's a significant piece of the economic pie. So following her remarks, the Minister will be joined on stage by Ehren, as I mentioned earlier, for a bit of a fireside chat around the rollout of that particular pipeline and some of the issues on their minds. But it's also an opportunity for you to begin thinking of some questions, and I think that both the Minister and Ehren are keenly interested in hearing what's on your mind. And so we'll set time aside to take some questions from the audience, and as I mentioned earlier, we will have a couple of roving mics. So please just put your hand up and we'll make sure that we get a mic to you. And we'd also, of course, encourage you to join in the conversation through social media. You'll see up on the wall our Twitter account, so please feel free to go at it. So if I can now, I'd like to ask Ainsley Wallace, who's here today representing Bruce Power, our gold sponsor, to come to the stage and introduce Minister Scott. Ainsley? Little careful.
Thank you, Mark, for the introduction. It's wonderful to be here today in such a packed room for this important market update. It is my great pleasure to introduce Ontario Minister of Infrastructure, Laurie Scott. Minister Scott was appointed to the infrastructure portfolio by Premier Ford in late June. Previously, she served as Minister of Labour, where she helped implement legislation to open up Ontario for business, to increase competitiveness, to increase transparency and accountability. She also ended the longest post-secondary strike in Canadian history. She's been elected 5 times since 2003 to represent her constituents in the riding of Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock. I'm here today representing OMERS and Bruce Power. Founded in 1962, OMERS is one of Canada's largest defined benefit pension plans with $97 billion in net assets. OMERS invests and administers pensions for 500,000 active, deferred, and retired members across Ontario. One of our key infrastructure investments in Ontario is the Bruce Power Nuclear Generating Station, which many of you will know is Canada's largest and one of its most unique public-private partnerships. Not only is the Bruce Power site the world's largest operating nuclear generating facility, with 8 reactors providing 30% of Ontario's electricity, its P3 model is also a significant driver of economic benefits for the province. Due to the strength of this P3 relationship, Bruce Power's Life Extension Project, and more specifically the Major Component Replacement Project, Bruce Power will create and sustain 22,000 direct and indirect jobs annually and inject $4 billion into Ontario's economy every year. The structure of this P3 will provide continued employment and revenue to the more than 200 companies and contractors directly involved in the MCR project. As you can see, Bruce Power's P3 is clearly a success story, one of many across Ontario. I'm excited today to hear Minister Scott discuss Ontario's infrastructure vision, the projects they're focusing on, and how P3s can play a role in bringing these critical projects to life. Now, I know many of us in the room have been eagerly awaiting this market update, so I would like to welcome Minister Scott to the stage.
Thank you very much, Ainsley, for that kind introduction. Boy, it's a big moment. There's a lot of pressure, waiting for the big pipeline. But it's great, and it's, I thank Mark Romoff and the entire team at C2, I knew I was going to do that, C2, P3, for hosting us today. It is great to be with all of you here today. An event like this, I know I'm talking to the people who get it, people who make infrastructure happen. And I know you understand just how important investments in infrastructure are for us, for our families, for our province, and for the people across the province. So as you will no doubt have gathered, over the past year, we are a government that has made infrastructure a marquee part of our mandate. Over the next decade, we are investing $144 billion in infrastructure. And earlier this year, we announced 5 of the most significant transit projects for the GTHA in a generation. We are building the Ontario line, a brand new subway line linking Ontario Place to the Ontario Science Centre. We are extending Line 2 of the Toronto subway to Scarborough. We are extending Line 1 of the Toronto subway to Richmond Hill. We are extending the Eglinton Crosstown LRT west to Pearson Airport. And we are extending the Sheppard line of the Toronto subway network east to Scarborough. In addition to that, we are building new hospitals, courthouses, police stations, community centers, highways, and bridges. It's a pretty ambitious agenda, and we are going to need all of you to help us. As everyone in this room knows, Ontario has a strong history of success with delivering projects using the P3 model. In fact, we are global P3 leaders. We are a stable jurisdiction where investors know their investments will be safe. We have a professional and internationally renowned delivery agency in Infrastructure Ontario, and I know Ehren and I are going to be up here later. And we do have a model that has a proven track record. Now, I'm just in for 3 months. I'm absorbing all this still, but it is impressive. Every day, it's an impressive story that comes out of the ministry. So research and experience has shown time and time again that P3s work to deliver large and complex projects. They reduce delays, protect taxpayers' dollars by ensuring projects are delivered on budget and harness innovation from the private sector. And I want you all to know that this fact is not lost on our government. We are committed to our P3 program, and we will use it to its full potential to achieve our ambitious infrastructure agenda. And I guess that brings us to why we are all here. I feel like there should be a drum roll, but today is a big day. A moment ago, I told you we were committed to our P3 program, but I want you to know that is more than just words. A robust pipeline of P3 projects is a critical part of our model's success. If we're going to ask you to help us succeed in our infrastructure commitments, we know you need the pipeline to help you plan and organize your team of consortium partners and capital. Today's pipeline has been a long time coming. Another drum roll I feel should come up. But as you know, our government did not release a pipeline last year. We would have liked to do so, But as a new government, we needed time to get our fiscal and capital priorities in order. And of course, of the last year, we completed this work. And I'd like to thank Infrastructure Ontario, my cabinet colleagues, my team at the Ministry of Infrastructure, and my predecessor, Minister McNaughton, for their hard work in finalizing the pipeline. Before we get to the pipeline itself, I want to announce a change to the way Ontario will be managing the pipeline in the future. As many of you in this room know, my office and Minister McNaughton's office before me engaged in a comprehensive listening exercise we called the Minister's Market Sounding Initiative. We met with over 60 infrastructure market participants to find out what is working, what isn't in the Ontario P3, and broader infrastructure space. In many of these meetings, you told us that you wanted more information, more transparency about Ontario's P3 program and pipeline. So I'm pleased to announce that going forward, the pipeline will be updated not once per year, but 4 times per year. Major pipeline updates in the spring and autumn will show changes in the project list, procurement times, and delivery models. And minor updates in the summer and winter will update procurement timelines only. And now, without further ado, I'm ready to launch the 2019 Ontario P3 pipeline. Yes. Once I have finished, I was hoping it was happening, but it's hard to see. Once I have finished speaking, you will be able to find a copy of the pipeline on the Infrastructure Ontario website. But first, I'd like to highlight some of the key parts of the pipeline. And don't worry, the words are small, but we'll be zooming in each section shortly. This year's pipeline contains a total of 32 projects worth over $65 billion. This represents the single largest commitment to P3 infrastructure in Ontario's history. The projects that you now see highlighted in green are new projects that were not on the 2017 pipeline. So now, let's have a look at some of the key new projects. As you can see, the pipeline now includes 4 of our marquee transit projects. In case you're wondering about the Sheppard Project, I mentioned earlier, we'll come back to that in a moment. Moving on to the vertical projects section, you can see that the pipeline contains 9 new hospital projects, in addition to 7 more that were on the previous pipeline. These 16 new hospital projects will expand healthcare services to communities across Ontario, including Windsor, Ottawa, the Niagara region, Toronto, Kingston, and Moosonee. Now, I want to directly address a question I'm sure you're all thinking about. Why are there still TBDs in the list? The simple answer is that for some projects, we are still working out the final delivery models and procurement timelines. But these are projects to which we are firmly committed. We didn't want to wait to let you know that they will be procured using the P3 model in the coming years. We wanted to tell you now. On the second page of the pipeline, you will see a familiar list of projects. These represent the projects that are currently in active procurement. This year, you will also see a new section on the back of the page of the pipeline called Projects in Planning. These represent projects to which we, the government, have publicly committed, but are still too early in the planning stage to assign a delivery model or procurement timelines. The point here is just to tell you that these 11 projects are coming and to underscore our commitment to robust pipeline in the coming years. I mentioned before we'd come back to the Sheppard Project. As you can see, it's on the list. The projects on this pipeline are a key part of Ontario's future prosperity. They are the roads and the rails we will use to get to work, and that our children and our grandchildren will use to get to school. They are the places our loved ones will be treated if they fall ill. They are the routes by which Ontario goods will find their way to market. Their construction will generate thousands of jobs in the skilled trades, engineering, and design sectors. And once they are built, they will employ thousands more people for whom they will become a new place of work. So, the 2019 market update is a challenge to the best in the industry. Big and small, local and international, to team up, partner with Ontario, and successfully deliver the high-quality infrastructure that our province relies on and depends on. So I invite you today to take up that challenge, to work with me as we build Ontario's future together. Thank you so much for your time and the much-anticipated waiting that has taken place for the pipeline. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'm just going to go down, mic up, and you guys take a minute, and I'll be back up.
I know she's coming back. So this is great. The soundbite for me, Minister, was pretty simple: 32 projects, $65 billion. And so, as the Minister mentioned, you'll find the full list of projects on Infrastructure Ontario's website. Feel free to go there now if you'd like. Minister will be just a couple of moments, and then we'll come back on stage. And we'll have a chance to, as I say, handle a bit of a discussion, the three of us, and then open it up to all of you. Whenever you're ready, Minister, I think we're ready too. Didn't take long to mic up, did it? So there were a couple of interesting things that you mentioned in your remarks, particularly I think the fact that this is the biggest update ever is really significant, no doubt, Minister. So I'm just wondering, what should the industry really read from that? Is the government investing more in infrastructure than it has previously?
Absolutely. This is a huge investment in infrastructure in the province. As I mentioned in the remarks, that, am I speaking up enough? Can everybody hear? Okay.
You're good.
You know, I know Phil Verster's here, but the largest marquee projects are in transit in the infrastructure plan. So 4 subways, 2 LRTs, 6 GO transit projects. There's a lot. There's the hospital projects, 3 community safety projects, being 2 community jails, community, I want to say that's the word, correction services, and 1 courthouse. And then there are 11 projects that we have put on the planning list. So I think the point at the end of the day, which I will reiterate and reinforce, is that we want to build Ontario. We're committed to P3s, and everyone in the room needs to help us accomplish that.
Thanks, Minister. Again, Ehren, you know the Minister's mentioned transit. Clearly that's a significant element of the portfolio. Can you talk a little bit about the status of the projects that you're now working on?
For sure. And I just echo, as the Minister said, each of these transit projects, I mean, they represented as a line on the pipeline, and there's a time for RFQ release, but each of them are actually programs in and of themselves. The Ontario line is a program that has lots of procurements to it. So we're well underway already. Public-private partnerships start with partnership on our side. So Phil, you talked about not seeing more of each other. I think I see way too much of Phil, but it's not changing. I wasn't going to mention that. We're together, joined at the hip, knee bone, and everything else, because as Infrastructure Ontario, all that we do is partnered with someone on the inside as well, a client, an owner, a partner that we work with. So Metrolinx and us together. But that's just the beginning of the partnership on our side, because we're working actively, of course, with the City of Toronto, York Region, their transit authorities, the consultants that they've had working with them on these projects. So we're building a partnership on our side to be able to deliver those projects, and that's well underway. We've got teams that have formed jointly from Infrastructure Ontario and Metrolinx and pulling in. We've done some hiring externally. We've brought in some people from the TTC and working with YRTC as well. We're developing now our plans to go to market, as showed on the pipeline, Ontario line first, followed pretty sequentially and not too far behind by the other subway projects, starting next year. But in the meantime, there are already things we're working on in terms of early works to get in the ground and start initiating those projects that you'll see even sooner. And I guess the last thing I'll say, Mark, is the very first step of that is a round of market engagement this fall. where we get a chance to talk to the market in much more detail about those projects or programs, the Ontario Line, the Scarborough Subway Extension, Yonge North and Eglinton West, to better understand how the market thinks of them, what the market sees as the right packaging, and early procurements enabling work. So there's a big round of that. We did, anyone who participated in the GO program, the GO expansion, knows how much time and effort we put up front into market engagement and trying to create a procurement that the market buys into and understands and has a reasonable amount of risk allocation. We're going to be doing the same things on the subways. So that'll start right after today.
So it's a pretty ambitious program. We get it. And it's not just transit. It cuts across a whole variety of sectors. I guess one of the things I'm sure you're thinking about is around capacity on the part of industry to, in fact, deliver on these projects. Can you talk a little bit about that particular issue? Because I know it's one that's foremost in your own thinking.
For sure. And of course, publishing a pipeline and communicating to the market, part of our goal, as the minister said, is to help the industry start to plan, think about their resources, line up teams, plan out bidding strategies, and a pipeline is part of helping to manage that. You'll also see, if you look at it carefully, you'll see that we have tried to create, as we always do, some semblance of managing the flow of projects. So it's not all at once. It's a lot, and it's happening fast, but we've tried to be reasonable in the spacing of those things. But more generally, I guess the work we've been doing very closely with the ministry, with the deputy and staff at the ministry, is just looking at market capacity more broadly, Mark, and we put it into 3 or 4 buckets. One is around skilled trades and labor, and whether Ontario is going to have the volume and capabilities. Think of specialized trades that you might need to do a transit build-out. So we're working hard at that. That can take a while to solve for. Working with colleagues at training in colleges, working with colleagues at other levels of government. So that's one bucket and one action we've got underway. How do we make sure we've got skilled trades? A very different one is how do we make sure we've got the bidder pool, equity investors, developers, constructors. And for that, it's a very different set of solutions. It's about, have we got an effective risk transfer program? Have we thought carefully about what the market can and can't handle? Have we created transaction structures that people actually are excited to bid on? Have we created a procurement process that's smooth and tight and doesn't require any more work than minimum? So we've got to make sure we've got our ducks in order there if we want to maximize participation. And then I'd say third, there's the underlying, the sort of the foundation of all that is, I'd say, the capacity of all of the professional services, engineering firms, for instance, financial advisors, legal support, and our own internal capabilities, all of the infrastructure to deliver the infrastructure. And again, there we're looking really carefully at how do we create the right partnerships, us with private sector, to get the best advisory support and make sure these projects go smoothly. So we think in those buckets. I said 3 or 4 because the fourth is about materials and supplies. Do we have access to commodities and equipment that we might need? And so we have just started to scratch the surface on that one, and as we do market engagement, we'll probably talk more about that with the industry to get some feedback, but definitely high on our radar.
That's helpful, and I'm not surprisingly, too, there are other jurisdictions around the country that may not have as ambitious a program, but they've certainly got big projects coming to market, too. So I know you're focused on making sure that you're talking to your colleagues around the country. I didn't mean to put words in your mouth.
No, that's right.
I know it's
Thank
happening. Minister, I know that one of your areas of focus has been around the ability to actually attract international competition for these projects. And I'm just wondering a little bit about your thoughts around what you see as sort of the value of that and things you're doing to enable more and more international players to look at the Ontario market.
Absolutely. We're asking the world to come and invest in Ontario. I know back in March, Minister McNaughton had said that Infrastructure Ontario, Ehren and his crew, would make sure international and domestic bidders are treated fairly in IO's procurement process. Having international bidders participate in Ontario means more competition, more innovation, and helps us deliver projects. So, I want to be crystal clear to those in the room that we don't mean that we're still not going to grow and encourage our local homegrown industries. We want to. But more competition on a more global investment is good for everyone. We want to help build those small, those medium-sized companies, engage them maybe with partners with other global companies so they can grow their businesses. I mean, I'm very proud of all the talent and the businesses that we have here, but as you've seen on the pipeline, there's a lot of ambitious projects that we need to take on, and we want to, and we're going to collectively need everyone engaged. So we hope that that does happen, and I'm very positive that it will, and Ehren has given you lots of details of the process that they're putting in plan.
I think the other element in that equation too, and it's one that's of real interest to the council, is that as more and more international competitors team up with companies here in Ontario and are successful in this market and develop an ability to work together effectively, we would hope they would take those partnerships to third markets around the world, right? Because I think that given Canadian expertise already well developed and our own history in this space, there are opportunities globally to really be successful in that market. And again, that's a little bit of the global mandate. I know that's come to you also, Ehren. So
right.
It's a real opportunity.
Yeah, we see that too. And I just, as the minister said, you can see that in our previous projects. Especially on the bigger ones, the magic formula, we don't prescribe this. We're open to the world. We're open to folks from next door or around the world. And the Minister McNaughton and Minister Scott have been clear that that's something they want to see us encourage. I'm just saying empirically, what we've observed is there's a real winning formula sometimes when you have amazing local understanding, capabilities, on-the-ground know-how, partnered with global expertise, people who've done it before, especially in highly technical areas where we're talking about tunneling, rail systems, some of the transit projects, for instance. There's a winning formula there that brings the best of the world and the best of Ontario together. So as the Minister said, we want all of the above.
Right, that's great. The Minister also mentioned in her remarks, it makes it sound like you're not here. Sorry, Minister. You mentioned,
I'm just still getting used to the minister part.
You mentioned in your remarks that there are some changes in projects since the last market update back in 2017. And I think particularly when it comes to Union Station expansion, which went initially to market as a DBF and now it's a TBD, also the lab initiative. I'm just wondering if you could comment a little bit on those adjustments.
Sure. You want me to start?
Sure.
So that your second one, let me talk about it first, the Union Station redevelopment. So those in the room know we have a project, it was on the pipeline in 2017 around Union Station. The redevelopment, first of all, anyone in the room knows Union Station, parts of Union Station have been in redevelopment for a while. This is specifically about the platforms and setting ourselves up for the future expansion of GO. And it's really fun, it's a foundational part of the overall GO expansion, given that everything comes through Union. And so we have a project very important as part of our broader GO expansion around the Union Station expansion. And we went to market with a DBF, and I think it's a really important example of how we are listening or adjusting to the market, because it's a project that's got a lot of complexity, Mark. It's got a really complicated ownership structure in Union. There's really important interface issues, the owners, the strata title of areas, who can work where, how to do that in a live rail corridor with trains, with other projects going on adjacent. So Metrolinx already has a program, for instance, of signaling work going on in that same area. The kind of risk allocation model and that happens in a DBF is not ideally suited for a project with that much uncertainty. So the bidders told us that. So we listened. And so the project is still happening. It's still on the pipeline. It shows as TBD because we've been having active conversations with the bidders on that project and with the market about how to do it in a different model of P3, one that might have a better balancing of risk sharing, one that might acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty that we're only going to sort out as we get into that project, just given its unique nature. So I have always said we're not dogmatic about a given model. We're sort of always about finding the right hammer for every nail. And that's a project where we think the right hammer is one that has a really good risk-sharing model, and so that's what we're working on. And it's going to be innovation. It's going to be probably a little different than how we've done our P3s. It'll still be a P3, but slightly different.
Things are moving. I can follow up on the lab question. So the lab, environment lab is put on hold. It is not canceled. It's put on hold, and what we're doing is looking at the optimization of the labs that we do have are we getting what we can from them? And so that process is going on right now, looking at the labs, looking at the optimization, and we'll be reporting back when that is done. I know when they say labs, I used to nurse in my other life, so I always immediately like, do I need to draw blood or anything? But it's just, the labs is very important, and we're just taking our time to optimize those values that are there.
Okay, thank you. So beyond the Union Station one, which is a TBD, there are others on the list. Can you talk a bit more about timeline around when those might move from TBD to something else?
Well, the good news is, as the minister announced, we're going to have a very different process going forward. And so twice a year, fall, spring, we're going to provide an update on the pipeline. Projects can get added, models updated, and of course, any schedule changes. And then the opposite months, summer, winter, just going to do date updates because it feels important to let the market know if we've changed the timing on an RFP or an RFQ. So Mark, to answer your question, our next release in the spring when we update new projects and models will happen. And if we had anything new to share about them before then, I am sure we would, but that's when our next major update would be.
Okay. And I don't want to be presumptuous, but I did the math. There are 450 people in the room, 4 more market updates. That's now 1,800 people. We're going to make some money off this. I'm really actually quite appreciative.
Might be online.
Yeah. It's been interesting sitting beside you. I've been invited to many things already in the
That's right.
20 minutes I was with you.
It's a benefit.
That's great. Thank you for the invitation. It's fabulous.
So let's talk a bit more about the other infrastructure. I mean, we've been talking very focused on P3s, obviously, but Minister, you've got a broad portfolio of different projects, and I'm just interested, I realize that you're relatively new in the portfolio, but that's maybe at sometimes the most interesting time, right, as it all comes at you. Can you talk a little bit about what else is in there and a little bit of your thinking on that?
Sure. Well, it's a very exciting time to be Minister of Infrastructure, I can tell you. Lots of announcements. People are very excited to see me in their communities, so that's a nice change sometimes too. But it is, I mean, the ICIP program, Investing in Canada Infrastructure program, has been very hotly applied for and sought after. So in just over a year, we've announced 350 projects that have been, brought to us by the municipalities and sent over and nominated to the federal government. So we're talking 144 northern and rural roads and bridges, air and marine projects that have been in. We've got inside the GTHA transit, outside the GTHA transit. We just opened up the community culture recreation stream at AMO in mid-August for intake on that. And we will be opening up the green stream coming soon also. So it's been a lot of work, and I've been happy to work with Federal Minister Champagne, who I see has spoken at one of your events at the flyers that are at the table. And we have a good working relationship with both the staff federally and provincially. They talk often. Minister Champagne, he and I have talked, and 10 days ago roughly now, we were with Mayor Tory, Minister Champagne, Minister Mulroney, myself, Minister Kinga Surma, and we had, I think about 8 federal MPs and about 6 MPPs that were all there to announce 2 of the transit projects that the federal government has looked at and approved. And I'm sure we all, in anticipation, wait for the approvals on the remainder of the project. So it's been very good working together. We want to get things built here, so we will continue on that good working relationship. And then, of course, we have the broadband, which is digital infrastructure. So how many part-time constituents do I have in the room today that all know the broadband and cell gap issues that occur in rural Ontario, but even, just outside York Region tells me, many places that I travel to in Ontario. So we have the Southwestern SWIFT that is taking in RFPs for those programs to extend more broadband and cell gap coverage there. In my part of Ontario, Eastern Ontario Regional Network, they're ready to roll out with some RFPs to help with those cell gaps. And so and I listen to my brother who works from home and can't wait for higher speed internet to come to his farm also. So that is a huge issue that I am sure you've all heard. It's just incredible how hot an issue it still is, and you can just be outside a big city and have a problem. So we've got 150 million in our MOI budget alone to look at projects to go to communities that are unserved right now and no service. And then we'll be certainly talking about Northern Ontario in the coming times. But it's good. There's a lot going on. As I said, I'm very excited. But we also have mentioned, I know earlier, I'll just touch on it lightly again, is the Minister's Market Sounding Initiative. So I want to thank my predecessor, Monty McNaughton, and probably most of the room here today for having that input, for taking the time, giving us feedback, and looking at ways that IO can improve procurement, delivery models, engage in the private sector, and even new project ideas. So, we'll look forward to making more of those announcements about what we have learned from all of you. But just a big thank you to all of you that engaged in that feedback. It's really appreciative, and I probably talked too long. Sorry.
Don't think so. I got one closer maybe for Ehren before we open it up, and that really is also about the fact that as much as IO is about P3s, it's also about other stuff. Can you talk a little bit about other things on IO's agenda at the moment and what's happening there?
Of course. So IO really, if you think of our mandate at the broadest sense, we are the end-to-end asset manager for the province. So yeah, building things is really important part of what we do and its core, but it's far from the only thing. Just on the building side for a second, though, we've talked about the P3 pipeline. There's, of course, thousands of projects that we deliver on government property across the province under smaller non-P3 models. We tried once a few pipelines ago to include those, if you remember. It's hard because so many of them are a program of building envelope improvements or window replacements across 50 buildings, and they're going to be procured in smaller ways. So they didn't perfectly fit for the pipeline concept, but those are going on. We have a really I think a good program developed of reinvestment in our assets. The announcement of a new pipeline gets a room like this. Renos, refurbishment, life cycle investments don't get as much glamour and excitement, but they are so fundamental to keeping asset health. So we're really committed to those, and we deliver those through all sorts of models, directly delivered by us, through partners we have in the private sector, and so those continue. And then looking beyond that, I've had questions in the room already, but if you step back, as I say, if we're thinking end-to-end about the assets we manage, one of the big areas that the government has challenged us is around transit-oriented development and thinking about not just building the network, but how do you create vibrant communities around those network, and how do you create economic value out of those as well? So Metrolinx and IO are working really closely together on that. It's not a P3 exactly, but it is. It's about finding developer partners who we can partner with both to get the infrastructure built and also create economic opportunity around those stations. So it is a P3, just a different form than on this pipeline. And so we're doing a lot of work there.
I also think it's important, and I think we all appreciate this, that at some point we almost have to get beyond almost a term around P3s, because it's more about how governments across the country and Indigenous communities, for that matter, are increasingly working with the private sector to get smarter and more thoughtful around how you invest in infrastructure to get the very best outcomes for Ontarians, right? So from my perspective, if you architect it that way, it's a P3 for me.
Exactly.
So thank you both for your comments. I'd like to now spend just a few minutes where we do have some time for questions, if there are any. We do have microphones available for those who'd like to ask a question. So if you can put your hand up, we'll make sure that someone's by your side pretty quickly. And we won't leave the room before you have a question or two.
How was dessert?
Right back here? Okay, thank you.
There just happened to be a microphone behind me, so I thought I'd stand up and ask a question. It's Chris Phillips with Fluor Canada. If you notice people looking down at their phones, it's not because they're not interested in your fireside chat, it's because the market update is on the website and people are reviewing it, I'm sure, in detail. I think one of the notable absences that appear to be there is a focus on roads, bridges, highways, or bus rapid transit projects. So maybe you can share with us messaging to road builders and bridge builders in the room about what that should mean to them or what we might see in the spring update. or what we might look forward to on that subject.
So I can, you're right, I probably didn't mention specifics. So London, Ontario was my first announcement for bus rapid transit, and the 10 requests from the City of London for outside the GTHA stream of the ISIP. I know there's a lot of acronyms I'm learning. But those are definitely committed to, and I think the federal government has signed off on some of those projects. I think we're up to 70 some projects the federal government has signed off. I'm looking for nods. But absolutely getting going. I mean, we've had projects that we've nominated for in the city of Nipissing, Hamilton, of course, Toronto, we've heard a lot about, but London, the Waterloo region, Lindsay, myself in my own area, but all across those projects for inside and outside the GTHA projects that we have, and there'll be, more things, hopefully, that are coming forward that get approved by the feds. Like I said, we've been working constantly with them, good relationship with the staffs, trying to get as much out the door as we can, but they certainly are included in the 350 projects that we have nominated.
And if I could add, Minister, so thanks for the question, Chris. The two that are on the pipeline, you'll see the Credit River Bridge, which is in market now. We've had a great dialogue, and this Garden City Skyway, I always say the name of that one wrong, Garden City Skyway, nailed it, which is on the list of 11 in planning. So let me just step back from those two and say we've been having a great dialogue with MTO over the past 6 months or so around their 10-year capital plans and what the long-term pipeline looks like. And as you know, the best, if you're going to do something as a P3, the best way to do that is from the start. And the lessons we've learned about being involved early, shaping the procurement, shaping even the EA process, for instance, to make sure that it's left open so that there's a corridor that people can plan around and be innovative in. If you jump in at the very end, it's much harder, it's much more constrained, and you're not getting the same value. So 6 months ago, we sat down with MTO and agreed, let's look at the 10-year capital plan and let's look for opportunities to do more. Those two bridge projects I named are the first two things to come out of that process. Credit River is a great example. It was pretty deep in plan. MTO had been planning it for 6 or 7 years, and we were getting in pretty late in the game, but together we agreed, you know what, this is an opportunity to try something. So we're doing it as a DBF. And Garden City's on there because, as the minister said, that list of 11 is to say to the market, we've made the decision it's a P3. We're not quite ready to say more yet, but we wanted to let you know. Just know that behind that 11 is the longer list that we are talking with MTO about. And so my advice to road builders is stay tuned for more. There's a very active discussion going on with MTO.
We'll keep you busy.
Thanks. Other questions?
Mark, I just note, I think it's reflective of this industry that after we put out what we say is the biggest pipeline, the first question is, where's more? which I appreciate. I think that's great.
So where's more? Okay, come back to that. If there are no questions, then I think we'll call it a day, and I'm going to ask maybe Julia Stefanishina. Pretty good, huh? Julia Stefanishina.
Been practicing up
to
here.
come back up and thank our speakers.
Can we stay up here?
Thank you, Minister Scott. Thank you, Ehren, for this absolutely invaluable update. And it's a great pleasure and honor for me to represent EY at these closing remarks. That was absolutely phenomenal discussion, and thanks for sharing your insights and views. I am personally super excited about the scale and the pipeline that we have. And we have heard today that the government has placed a high priority on infrastructure investment, recognizing its central role in stimulating the economy, creating jobs, enhancing quality of life for people in Ontario. And provincial government, as Minister Scott pointed, commits $144 billion over 10 years in infrastructure, but which is more important, I really liked Mark's summary, 32 projects, $65 billion. And in particular, I was struck by your comment about top 5 projects, 4 of them on the list for this year in transit sector, which means that There will be a huge focus on transit-oriented development and leveraging third-party investments for transit expansion and allowing developers to build above transit stations and help to grow the infrastructure in communities. This is important to hear that message for so many of us because this initiative creates new opportunities for collaboration between public and private sector and has the potential to increase housing supply and community development across the province. And we've been observing that happening in different parts of the world, and we are so excited to be part of it here in Canada. Equally important notice is that Ontario government is taking a new focus on pipeline planning, and I'm sure that so many people were part of Minister's Market Sounding Initiative this year, and it's great that we'll have more transparency and more insights of what's happening in a pipeline. So, as a private sector representative, I'm sure that we are all excited by this news, and we are happy to collaborate with the province government and contribute our portion to Eren's point, from financial and technical and legal advisors to the development of the transit strategy and transit projects in Ontario. Thanks again for this exciting opportunity to be part of this discussion, and thanks to Minister Scott and C2P3 for hosting this event. And I'm giving mic back to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Julia. That was great. I really appreciate it. One thing I will say, and I think we all agree, there's lots in this pipeline, and there's probably something here for everybody in this room, so I hope that you'll find that with a little bit of study, there's opportunity here, and that this will continue to be the most robust market in Canada without a doubt. But again, for people like many of the members in this room of the Council and for Ehren and the team at IO who are invited to go to many different jurisdictions around the world, there's no doubt that what's happening in Canada when it comes to infrastructure generally, and P3s in particular, everybody's interested in what we're doing and how we're doing it. And even though we don't always get it right, it's important to know that we know where we're good and we know where we need to do some work, and we can engage with other communities that way, and it's a very productive discussion. And quite frankly, while you may not be aware of that, Pierre, what I did learn a little while ago in Chile is that here's a country that's actively engaged in toll roads, which is something that historically has not been very popular in Canada, but they have a long history of unsolicited proposals. So while they want to learn from us as to how we do our P3s, they've got some learnings for us because they've done some very interesting things in areas that now we're getting involved in. So this is a global phenomenon, this infrastructure investment, and Canada and Ontario in particular has the opportunity to play right at the heart of it, and it'd be a huge pity if we didn't capitalize on that, both on home and then taking our expertise abroad. So again, thank you all for coming today, because I know these are issues that are also on your mind, and we at the Council are keenly interested in helping all of you in any way we can, whether you're members or not. And I would finish off by saying again, thank you to the Minister and thank you to Ehren for making today possible, for recognizing the relationship that we're looking to continue to strengthen between the Council and the various ministries across the province of Ontario. Also, thank you all for coming today. And once again, I hope to see you again in the not too distant future. I would think about November 18th or 19th. Thank you again. Have a great day. Bye-bye.